Welcome to Coach Development Live on the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. If you're a new or developing coach who wants to coach with confidence, get better on the floor, and make a real impact, you're in the right place. Every episode, you'll hear from Level 4 coaches Todd and me, Kristin Bowen, as we break down practical coaching tips, real-world strategies, and answer your biggest coaching questions live. No fluff, just the help you need to sharpen your skills and become the best coach you can be. Let's get started.
Kristin, we made it. We have officially made it. Look at that.
We've arrived.
Intro. Who did we get? Was that AI to dub your voice?
It was
the intro.
AI. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no way that you could have done that without a bunch of pauses and ums in there usually, right?
No, I did it.
You crushed it. That was
That
awesome.
looked awesome. Yeah, that looked really good.
Yeah. So it's official. This is the first episode that's going to be on the Best Hour podcast platform. So anywhere where you guys listen to your podcast, you're going to find this. If this is you listening to this for the first time, what's it been, about 6 months? I think October is when we started doing these once a week.
Yeah, I think we've been going, like 5 or 6 months at this point. Yep, every week. Every Thursday, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
That's it. So you guys like what you're listening to, go back and go to YouTube and you'll find a lot more of these videos and a lot more of this content. But welcome. Today's the day. It is a couple interesting things going on. Number one, 25.3. Kristin, what's your guess?
Well, I saw Dave's. Did you see Dave's hint? Which are always so obscure. I don't even try to think about it. But I don't know. It had like a shower tile wall on there. So of course everybody's saying wall walks. I'm like, that feels too obvious for Dave, but I would love a wall walk. So I don't know. What's your guess?
I'm expecting a wall walk as well. I think you knew this. Like, it's actually been like a month now, but I put our what would it be? Our logo on our wall. But I had to like touch it up and then I needed to seal it. And so because I figured that there's going to be wall walks or handstand push-ups or something like that, I've been working hard this week to touch it up. And now I'm sealing it. I'm trying to get a couple layers of seal on it so we can wall walk all over it. But yeah, we'll see.
The drops made just think of shuttle runs. Interesting. I can see that.
Shuttle runs and wall walks, that'd be tough.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. Good morning, Jess. Good morning, Brad. I'm at what's happening, guys. 2 drops equals, what does he say? A couplet?
A couplet.
Ooh, that could be it.
Yeah. I swear, I don't even try to figure it out. His hints are so random and make sense only to him sometimes.
I think the first one, I haven't seen any of the ones this year, but I heard people talking about last week's actually had some logic. There was something with guns and like it was something that was like 22.3 or something like that, or 223 was in the picture. And so since it was
the repeat
of 22.3.
All right. Well, speaking of last week's, did you end up doing it again? Last time you were thinking about maybe hitting it for a second time.
Yeah, I was, the only time I'll ever repeat a workout, I think we talked about this last week, was if I enjoyed the workout and I thought it was fun, or if I wasn't pleased with my effort. And I definitely didn't, well, I kind of thought this one was fun, but it was so painful that it's not too terribly fun, but I was pretty disappointed in myself. I got to the last round with plenty of time to finish it. And I just mentally
you opted out.
Opted out. Who was I telling? I was telling somebody that was like, I got to the barbell and I had time to get my, like 3 sets of 5, which is what I needed to do. But I kept telling myself, I was like, if you just wait like 30 seconds.
Oh, that was me. You were telling me that.
Yeah. You can do all 15 unbroken, knowing in the back of my mind that there's no chance. I was like, just do enough time to where when you pick that up, you can do all 15 unbroken.
Because then we were talking a little bit about how when you're mid-workout, and your heart rate's high and it's literally mid-workout and you decide at that moment, I think it's a good idea to change my plan. You should then logically be like, okay, no, not a good idea to change my plan. Never a good idea to change the plan during that time. Yeah, that was a fun workout. I liked that one. I did it one time, as always, once, and I was good with it.
Yeah, so. like I told you, I was kind of thinking about, and I had aspirations of redoing it on Monday, and my Monday absolutely blew up. My schedule did not allow for it. So no repeat, just had to go with what I got. So we'll see. Yeah, Angelo, I'm with you. I wish we had an explanation out of each one of Dave's clues of like, this is what I mean by
the
this. I think he
mushroom.
used to kind of do that in the early days when he was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Hell freezes over. I like that. That's a good one. I
like how
yeah,
Sky says something with a row. She says something with a row, not based on the clue. Just feel like
but
it's needed. Like not
be-
based on anything. Just like we haven't done a row. We usually do a row.
yeah,
I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
yeah, that's one movement that's not been in there. I'm with Brad. I think it's going to be pretty cool. Anybody think that, who is it? Colton's won the first 2 workouts. That's pretty exciting. I wonder if he'll win the third. I'm sure you've
What
been
girl
really
has
keeping
won
up with
them?
that.
Do you know?
I don't think it was the same for both of them. I'm not sure.
All I know is it wasn't me.
It was not you. I can't believe it. I'm disappointed.
I know.
But we're not here to simply talk about the Open this week. We actually want to talk about coaching. And this week, we want to discuss 2 things, and they both relate to teaching. And so the first one is going to be around teaching styles, or like 2 teaching concepts based on the movements that we're teaching. We've got the concept of teaching through layering and a concept of teaching through using progressions. So we're going to start this week by talking about layering. So in a simple sense, Kristin, what do we mean by layering, and how does that differ from using a progression?
Okay, so last week, as a reminder, we talked about all through the points of performance, and specifically knowing what the points of performance are, memorizing them for the 9 foundational movements, and then setting yourself up to know
And
them for
yeah,
the
and
movement that you're
I
teaching.
asked on my coach dev call yesterday. I was like, hey, if you've been to our level 2, we kick off the weekend with a lecture around foundations of effective training, and we start by talking about teaching and how important that is. And I was like, there's 2 components that are required to be an effective teacher. There's an internal and an external component. What is the internal component?
The knowledge, knowing what it is you're going to teach. Like
And
you
so
can't
that's
teach something if you don't know what it is you're teaching. So yeah, you have to have the knowledge, that base of knowledge. And that's where knowing those points of performance, memorizing the points of performance, not the sexiest part of the job by any means, but so necessary if we want to be able to do the second part of teaching, which is effectively communicate that knowledge to your athletes. So that's what layering essentially is. It's a process, it's a system to effectively communicate what we want to see our athletes do. So when we talk about layering, if we think about the different points of performance we want to see executed by our athletes, so points of performance, we're simply just talking about essentially the checklist of good movement, what we're looking for. Layering is a system where we take one point of performance at a time and we teach our athlete how to do that while allowing them to do the full movement, focusing on that one thing. And then once we do a little bit of that, then we can layer on or add the next point of performance. And then we add the next point of performance. And all the while we're essentially, I've heard it compared to building a house, starting at the foundation, or building a cake. Like every cake has a layer and you're adding on until you get all of those points of performance taught. And then they're all on the table for you to then see and correct.
Yeah. So if we go back to last week and I quizzed you, there's 5 points of performance for the air squat. What are they?
Weight in the heels, neutral spine, full range of motion, depth below parallel, and then we want the knees to track the toes.
Cool. So the idea, like you just described, of layering in points of performance would mean that we pick one of those. So let's say, because you said it first, weight in the heels, that's going to be our teaching point. That's going to be what we focus on. But when we say go, the athlete's going to do a full squat. They're going to squat all the way down. Probably if it's like a specific warm-up, they're going to hold that position in the bottom of their squat, and then you're going to stand them up. this concept of layering works for two reasons. By delivering and communicating to our clients or to our athletes that they should be doing and thinking about and focusing on one point of performance, it makes their job significantly easier, because now all their brain has to think about for that squat is like keeping their weight from the middle of their foot back towards their heel. And then for myself, and what I always like to repeat to coaches is that this is me verbally reminding myself essentially nearly the only thing I should be looking at. Hey guys, I want you to work on keeping your heels down. And so in my head, I'm like, look at their heels, look at their heels, look at their heels. That's it.
100%. Yep.
Cool. Now I get around. I've looked at everybody's heels. They've focused on it. We've done enough reps. And then we're going to go back and I'm going to teach the next point. And in the sequence that you covered it, you said neutral spine. Awesome. I'm going to teach that neutral spine. I'm going to have that as the thing we're emphasizing and that they're focusing on, still remembering that heels are there. But now it's like, hey, we're working on that flat back or neutral spine, however you want to describe it. You give the athlete a how-to so they can focus on it. Maybe it's like squeeze your belly and lift your chest as you squat. And then because I verbally said that, I'm reminding myself, all right, I'm looking at whether they keep their chest up and their belly tight. I'm looking at their back, and that's what I'm focusing on with this thing.
And that whole process, it's pretty straightforward, but it can be hard. Like it can be really challenging to do that effectively. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. So tell me, what do you notice? Like, what are the challenges that you've experienced or that you see other coaches frequently struggle with when it comes to layering in points of performance?
All right, I'll give you two that pop to mind right away, and then let me know if you can think of or you have any more. One of them is just having the discipline to selectively keep points of performance like in your back pocket and not talk about them as you're only focusing on the one, right? Like it's really hard, especially if you're not practicing this system, to only tell your athletes to focus on that one thing. Like if we're talking about heels, because so many coaches want to give more information, right? Like you've studied the points of performance, you have a plan, you know all the things that you're looking for. And now for the first, 5 to 6 reps, we're only going to focus on the one thing. So it can be really hard for coaches to not throw all of the information out at one time. Yeah. And with that, the second thing that comes to mind that's really common is, let's say that you did just say, we're going to focus on keeping our heels down, and you're doing a really great job. Like that's the only thing that I'm telling my people to do. And then everyone starts squatting. And you see some people who aren't going low enough, and you see some people who are losing their neutral spine, and you see some people who's pushing their knees forward too quickly. And the most common thing I then see is now people get distracted, coaches will get distracted, start now trying to focus on all these things that they're seeing, completely forget that they're supposed to be looking for heels, and then their whole plan goes out the window. So just staying disciplined to really focus on that one thing, not only to teach it, but also to look at your athletes and know that, okay, that's the thing that I am focusing on. That's what I'm going to look at now. And then when I get to my next point, I'm going to pull the other things in.
Yeah, those would be the two things that are top of mind for me as well. It's like, to your point, the idea and the concept of like, sometimes coaches just think it's too simple to only do one thing at a time. They're like, this is boring, this is lazy. And so instead of being like, hey guys, this is the air squat, this is what it looks like, here's what I want you to focus on, it's going to be your heels down, looks like this, cool, you get them doing it. Like, I can remember the days when I was the coach that I was so proud because I just remembered the points of performance. And so I'm in front of the group and I'm like, all right, guys, today we're going over the air squat. This is what it looks like. So here's what I want you thinking. You're going to start by sending your butt back and down. I want you to keep your weight in your heels throughout this. Make sure your chest stays nice and tall and your belly's tight. You're going to keep sending your hips back until they get below your knee. You guys see this? I want, if you had a marble on your knee, it should be able to roll into your hip. And then, oh, by the way, I want your knees pushing out as hard as you can over your toes as you do this. Then you're going to drive through your heels to stand all the way up and extend your hips and knees. All right, that's our squat. You guys ready?
Yeah, I bet every single one of your athletes was like, you crushed those points of performance. Good job.
Yeah, like they even know, right? And
well, for anybody listening, I would love it if you could put in the chat what the very first teaching point that Todd gave us was? What was the very first thing we have to think about? Because I certainly don't remember.
Well, and that's always it, is like, I'll ask, and I would love, like, yeah, to your point of either what was the first thing that I said, or based on what I just said, what is the one thing you would be thinking about as an athlete? Because I'll see this at level 2s where somebody's teaching one of the movements and they run into that trap where they start to kind of spout off all of the points of performance or a bunch of them. And then I'll stop the group and I'll be like, I'll ask one athlete, hey, Kristin, what are you thinking about right now? What's the one thing you're focusing on? They'll say something. I'll ask another athlete, what are you focusing on? And they'll be like, oh, I'm thinking head out of the way. And then I'll ask the coach, what are you going to be looking for? And they'll be like, oh, well, belly tight. And I'm like, if I can't ask that question and get the same response from everybody in the room, including the coach, it probably wasn't clear enough. It probably wasn't direct enough. It probably was too much. And it's going to be a struggle for us. And so it just makes, like you said, it's a systematic approach. It's a system that's going to make our job so much easier as coaches to see and correct. And that makes our athletes' job so much easier because they only have to focus on one thing at a time. And so Brad asked a good question here. I think if you're focusing on one thing, or I guess it's not really a question, and you see a different fault pop up, do you address it or do you complement the focus area you are watching? I'm going to say yes. And here's why. Is it forbidden to like fix another fault if you see it happening? Absolutely not. But if it leads to, like Kristin talked about, distraction, and now all of a sudden you forget what your focus is, and now you're just caught up in working on that, then you're going to miss some opportunity to do some seeing and correcting. And so I think of this concept and this thing in 2 different ways. If I'm teaching the air squat, where I know those 5 points of performance, and for example, say we started with heels and I notice somebody that's back's rounded, in my mind, even if I see that, I'm like, hey, I haven't taught that yet. I'm going to get there. I'm fine. I'm going to let it ride for now. On the flip side of that, if I'm teaching something like a front squat, and I'm going to go back to the quiz here, Kristin, what are the 2 new unique points of performance for the front squat?
We want a proper rack position, and the bar path, we want it to be as close as possible to the frontal plane, like straight
Sweet.
bar path.
So when I'm layering in points of performance for the front squat, those are the 2 things that I'm going to be teaching. And so let's say that I am teaching the rack position and I want people to keep their elbows up as they're squatting. And now that is my focus. But as people are squatting, I notice that your knees are caving in. Well, I'm going to cue and correct your knees caving in, still knowing that like the elbow position and the rack position is my primary focus. Now I'm doing this here, whereas in the air squat, I did not fix it, because with the front squat, I'm not going to teach knees explicitly. I'm going to stick to rack position and bar path. And so if I see one of those lingering faults that are like an air squat point of performance, I'm going to fix it when I see it, but stay focused as my teaching points and as my primary thing, the rack position and bar path, based on when I'm teaching those. What's your approach to this concept, and what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty similar approach there. And I just want to add one thing additionally onto that. So if we go back to the air squat, and let's say we are teaching the air squat, and you're talking about heels, that's the point you're focusing on. And then you notice somebody's chest is caving forward, right? But you haven't taught neutral spine yet. One thing that I'll encourage coaches to do is, it's just a great self-assessment, right? Because if you're thinking about heels and you see someone's chest roll forward and you say to them, hey, so and so, like lift your chest at the bottom or whatever, then you should also be cataloging in your brain, I haven't taught this yet. I need to make sure that I teach this, because that again will help you stay on track, and it will just help you really continue to fine tune that process of, hey, I'm allowed to fix something if I see it, but I need to make sure that that doesn't prevent me from then teaching people how to do it correctly. Because if we can teach people how to do it correctly, that oftentimes gets ahead of people having that fault. And so what can happen often is we get distracted because we see certain people having a fault that we haven't coached, or we haven't taught, I should say. And then instead of teaching it, now we're just running around and trying to make people's movement better, like correcting it, where it's like, just take a step back and recognize, oh, I haven't even taught this point yet. So maybe you see a couple people with their chest rolling forward and it's like, all right, let me take a step back. Okay, guys, next thing we're going to think about as you go to squat, we're going to keep our arms over our head as we squat. And so you can use the faults that you see almost as a cheat sheet or reminder of the next point that you need to teach so that you can continue to stay on track. So to your point, I don't think there's anything wrong at all if you see something to say something. If you see it, then make the correction. But just know and assess for yourself, have I actually taught them how to do this right yet? And if you haven't, it might be a good indicator that you could do that. And then it's like, you're going to cover a lot more ground if you teach everyone how to do it right than if you just walk around trying to clean up people's movement without telling them how to do it the right way.
Well, and to your point, and I like the fact that you brought that up because there is a lot of like coaching styles where it's like, hey, these people have been around, they know how to do it. I'm just going to clean up the stuff that I see. And if we are just, assuming that everybody knows how to squat, we show it, we mention all the points of performance, we don't really teach them one at a time, and then we just start calling reps and we go around and look at everybody, we're going to see some stuff that's pretty obvious. Right? We're going to see the person whose chest is clearly coming forward. We're going to see the person whose knees are well in. We're going to see the person that's clearly on their toes. But what we lose the opportunity for is to find those nuanced, more subtle versions of the faults. And from my experience working with coaches, most of the time when I point it out and I'm like, hey, look right at Kristin's low back, they're like, oh, it's rounded, obvious. But if I'm not looking specifically only at your low back at the bottom of the squat, it's not obvious enough to jump out at me. And as we become better as coaches, and specifically as coaches,
that works. I think coaches, like it's a verb. It's an action item of what we do. We're
as we get better at
coaches.
teaching in general, the obvious, clear, dramatic faults are going to lessen, right? And so in order for us to continue to make improvements in our athletes' movements, we're going to have to get better with our eye, meaning we're going to have to see more of those subtle versions of the faults. And the only way that's going to happen is if we are more deliberate and specific and proactive, I like to describe it as for what we're looking for. And
that's proactive versus reactive. Yes.
Yep.
Like teaching them how to do it right is proactive. Reactive is just letting them do the movement and look around to see what you can potentially fix.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yep. Yeah. So those are a couple things. Yeah, that concept of 2-1-2 while layering, Brad. And if you think about, and we'll get to that in a future call, but if you think of that concept, and for those of you guys that are unaware of the 2-1-2 concept, the 2 at the beginning is trying to give 2 cues or corrections in a static position. So in the air squat, that would be like as people are standing. Before I call a rep, the 1 is to watch and to cue one athlete in the dynamic phase of the movement. And so as they're actually moving, and then the 2 at the end is to give an additional 2 cues or corrections in the receiving or finished position. So in this case, holding at the bottom of the squat. And so, yes, absolutely, we still want to use that concept. And so like the 2 at the beginning, I'm always going to be checking people's feet. We've talked about this on these calls multiple times, where it's like people's stance has the biggest impact on their movement, and most people do it wrong. So I'm always looking at people's feet. Then from there, I'm probably going to cue somebody to pull their ribs down or squeeze their belly or something like that. Those would be the first 2 things on that front end 2. Then when I say go, I'm going to be watching whatever point of performance I just taught, or all else being equal, the dynamic phase of the squat. The big thing there is going to be the initiation of the hips. And then at the bottom, we can see what once again, whatever point of performance we are teaching at the time, or anything that we've covered before. Because all of that stuff that we've already taught is still fair game. And we can, once we've taught it, we can go back and readdress it as we go.
Yeah. And when we're talking about layering on these points of performance and, giving them something to think about with each full rep that they're doing, that is in addition to having already taught setup right? Stance, grip, body position. So when we say that 2-1-2, or we're thinking like the positioning static and dynamic, the two different positions there, then yeah, I'm always going back and rechecking that static position. I'm always going back and checking the setup position, and then calling the rep and focusing on whatever that point of performance is that we're layering in. So both those things are going to be, both those things are going to apply for sure.
So I've got a question for you, but also for everybody listening. And I'd be curious, you guys can drop it in the chat. When you're teaching and you're layering in points of performance, do you always layer every single point of performance in one at a time? Or is there a time and a place to where you can combine, where you can exclude, where you don't teach all of them? So I want to hear from you guys in the audience. Drop in the chat. Do you always teach every point of performance? Yes or no? Why or why not? And when would be the scenarios to where you don't, or when would be the scenarios to where when you do?
And this is, I love this question because this can really trick people up a little bit. Like we were talking a few minutes ago about pitfalls and common problems we see. And I think this is definitely one that trips people up. Like, what order do you do it in? How many reps do you give everybody? Do you have to watch every single person do a rep for each time that you layer in a point of performance? And the answer for me,
hold on. I want to
okay.
see a few more people throw stuff in the chat before I do that. And so we're going to address what Brad's saying before I let you answer.
We'll get to our answer right after this quick break.
right after the break by our sponsor.
From our sponsor.
Well, I could drop our sponsor, the perk. We've got the perk big deal going on today, 31% off if you guys want some coffee, but I'll save that for a little bit later. But Brad makes mention of, do you start layering beyond the points of performance? I think things like cycling, breathing, bracing, especially for all the movements that don't have POPs. Well, Brad, I'm going to tell you right now that there is no such thing as a movement that does not have points of performance.
Oh man, I wanted Brad to put in the chat which movements are you referring to?
They all do, but I know where you're headed with this thing, and I'd be curious. Yeah. Like, I absolutely think something like cycling reps of power cleans or cycling reps of push jerks or something like that are definitely things that, like, we can teach the full movement, we can get through it, and then it's like, all right, guys, we're doing grace today, and I want you to do, not just singles. I want big unbroken sets, and so here's how I want to teach you the technique of resetting the bar to the ground or whatever that is. I think that's perfectly appropriate. Do you teach that stuff frequently?
Yeah, sure. Not instead of the points of performance, but it's all part of my teaching plan, right? Like, and exactly what Brad says, do you start layering beyond the point, the written points of performance? Like a push jerk, I think, is a great example, or a snatch is a great example, where we have those points of performance written down that we want to cover, we want to prioritize, but then also recognizing the workout is not the athletes doing one push jerk at a time with a PVC pipe holding in the receiving position. So it is important to teach them how to cycle it, how to return the bar, whatever the case may be. So I just add time in my teaching plan to do a set at the end where I teach people that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like it. All right. We've got some answers here. Let's jump in and look, and then we'll hear your answer. So Nick, nope. Depends on how much time I have in the specific warm-up and what my focus is for the class in general. And so I'm assuming that means, like, whether he always layers them in or whether he combines some is going to dictate how much time he has in class, which I think is a great answer.
Yep, love that.
And definitely should be considered. I will put two things together if the athlete can handle it. Yep. So based on, if I've got a class full of experienced athletes that I've had for time, that like for a significant amount of time, that have heard these things before, there's likelihood that I can combine one or two things at a time.
Yeah, let me go back to that one. Let's give an example there, cool. Because what is a great thing to do is think about what makes sense to combine. So it could be the sequencing, like the order of operations. It could be the body part. So an example for the squat maybe would be the hip. And I want to see the hip go back and down. And I also want to see it get below the knee. So I can do both of those. And one of them is dynamic, and I can hold people at the bottom and create that second one to be static. And so I combine those two together all of the time. right? Because
Yep.
now as a coach, I just have to watch the hip, and I'm watching, and the athlete really just has to think about the hip. So I'm watching the hip go back and down, and I'm still watching the hip to make sure it's below the knee. And
I
then,
I
man.
I love this because I like your brain and my brain are different, oddly enough.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
crazy, right?
what?
Because I think of the hip back, and I will combine that with heels because the hip going back shifts the weight back towards the heels. And so I'm like,
For
cool, if
sure.
I'm watching the hip go back, more than likely my athlete's going to get their weight back in their heels. So oftentimes I will combine those two things. And then the others that I will combine will be knees out and depth,
Okay.
because knees out provides and creates the space to get the hip crease below the knee. And so it's easy for me to look at what the knees are doing and also where the hips are at relative to the knees. So I'll combine those two. So,
And if you push your knees out, then that typically means it's going to help you keep your weight back on your heels. So that's
that's
one
what
of the reasons that I can combine those. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Sweet.
Neither is wrong.
Yeah.
But as long as
Um,
you have a reasoning behind it that makes sense to you, I think that that's where you're going to set yourself up to combine them in
and
a
I like
successful way
this one
there.
for Kimura, and especially like when I started, I wanted just the repetition of covering every single one of them. And then also to his point of making sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yep.
If we've got a new athlete in class, or there's somebody that I'm not aware of and I've not coached before, then I always call it like coaching to the lowest common denominator. If I'm unsure, or if somebody's potentially new, then I'm going to start from scratch and I'm going to teach every single one. Now,
because there's value and benefit even for your more experienced athletes to have a very clear focus of what they're thinking about each rep. And it helps
yep,
keep them engaged too. If you're doing deadlifts and you're just like stand, 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 that's
yeah,
boring. But if I'm in a class and every time I'm doing a deadlift, okay, on this one, I want you to really think about pushing your knees back as you stand. I want you to really think about squeezing your armpits like you've got like a orange underneath them. It just gives you something to think about each time, and
yeah.
then helps your newer people.
Once again, yeah, and once again, because when we cover it and verbally say it out loud, ideally that directs our eyes to look for those things. And so even if we have more advanced athletes, when we look specifically at their movement and those points of performance, oddly enough, pretty often we will find opportunities to improve them.
Oh yeah, and I'll
Um,
tell you what advanced athletes do 99% of the time is they let that bar go around their knee on the deadlift when they
oh
stand.
yeah,
And it's so subtle that if you're not looking for it, you're just like, yeah, they look good to go. And another example, it's like, look at their knee on this one in relation to the bar. And then they stand, and sure enough, if you really are looking for it, you can see, oh yeah, they are going around their knee. Yep.
yeah.
And same
I
thing with
love,
Amit. Yep.
yep, teaching all the points of
Want to
performance.
teach all the points of performance.
I always bring this one up too. If any of you guys have ever worked with like a brand new athlete, say you're doing like an on ramp or fundamentals, or it's the first class and you're doing like a one-on-one session, and you demonstrate the movement. So once again, we've been talking about the squat, and you're like, "Hey, Kristin, this is the squat." You demonstrate it. You start coaching Kristin through it, and you get through like your first 2 points of performance, which maybe are like hips back and chest up, and she's nailing it, and she's doing the knees out and her heels are down and she's getting to depth, even though I've only mentioned and touched hips back and chest up. But because she's doing it so well, I'm like, oh, she knows how to squat. I'm good. I don't need to cover knees out. I don't need to cover heels down or depth, and we're good to go. And then you go out onto the gym floor. She shows up the next day, or usually it's like that same day. If I go out on the gym floor and we actually do a workout now with that movement, the workout starts, and all of a sudden, like everything beyond what I taught goes wrong. And after doing this so many times in my life of like half teaching the movement and then just stopping where I'm at because they were doing it right, what I came to realize is that oftentimes people will do it correctly on accident. Meaning somebody's so good visually to watch me and just mimic what I'm doing. If I don't reinforce, like, hey, Kristin, you're already doing a really good job of this, but what I want you to know is that every time we squat, our hip crease gets below our knee. It looks like this. Cool. Let's do a couple more reps so you can feel that. Once again, you're already doing a great job with this, but I want you to know that our knees need to track out over our toes. It looks like this. Like if we don't give that 1 or 2 reps and just that reinforcement of something that our athletes already doing well, but just reinforcing that that's needed to be done, Sometimes they'll go out on the floor, they'll add load, they'll add speed, they'll add intensity, and all of a sudden the wheels fall off the bus. And it's like, man, she was doing it so well when we were doing it one-on-one. What the hell happened? Well, she was doing it right on accident because she just mimicked what you did, but you didn't reinforce what was required for the squat to be done correctly. Have you ever experienced that?
And that also goes to, to your point, this is where we can't assume that just because we taught someone how to do this one day, that 3 days later, a week later, 2 weeks later, they come back and they remember all of the different things they're supposed to be thinking about. Right. So, repetition is key here.
I like Angelo. Yeah. Call to start and then have them do them all on their own for a few. I think that's great. Like touch all the points of performance, teach them, and then let them do a few reps on their own. I think that's great. What do we got? Class dependent. I tailor my approach based on the aggregate skill level of my athletes in class, combine the intermediate to advanced athletes, one at a time for the beginners. Yep. Hell yeah. I think that is important to know who's in the class.
Yeah, class dependent for sure.
Yep. Coach to the, like I said, the lowest common denominator. Sky usually try to hit a couple points of performance hard with the rest thrown in when seen. Our classes are usually time crunch, so don't get a lot of time to really drill in every point of performance. And if that's the case, and it's like, hey, we're teaching the filthy 50 and I got a class of 20 people and I got to get through this thing. Well, you're probably going to pick one or two things that you want the focus to be for those movements. And that's perfectly acceptable and all right as well. But we want to make sure that we're teaching something. Let's see.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that. It's like, hey, one or two things like that. Sometimes that's appropriate. And as long as everybody's moving safely, it's like, that's going to be our focus point. And I'll tell people that oftentimes, especially newer coaches, for something like a snatch or a clean, it's like, hey, it's okay if today you're only focusing on the timing of the pull. And it's like, you might not even really be looking for hip extension that closely because your biggest focus today is just the timing. And if you're looking to develop your eye and really practice some of this stuff, it's okay to do that every once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. And like to Amit's point, coaching the advanced athletes, there is so much benefit to doing this in class. Number one, you're going to make them move better, which is always the goal. Number two, we are setting the tone that everybody in class needs improvement. Everybody gets coached, and it's just going to allow nobody to feel isolated or picked on. Like from my experience, when you're at a gym and the only people that are ever getting coached and told to improve their movement are like the beginners or the people that are unfamiliar with it, sometimes they can get defensive. They can feel picked on. But if like the best athlete and the person who wins all the workouts is still getting told to push their knees out and lift their chest up, then it just sets the tone that it's like, oh no, this is just part of what happens in our class here. All right. We're going to go back to what we mentioned to Brad and what he said. The movements without points of performance. Come on, dude.
Yeah, this is great. I love this. So he says burpees, rowing, biking, jump rope. There are specific best practices, but CrossFit doesn't outline specific points of performance for those. What are your thoughts?
That's because in CrossFit, Brad, as you know, we don't define specific points of performance for every movement out there, but we give you those common movement themes that are seen in all functional movements. Not each theme is seen in each movement, but each movement has some of the themes. And so you look at something like rowing, like what movement from the 9 foundational movements essentially has the exact same points of performance as what's required for rowing?
Yeah, we can look at a sumo deadlift high pull. We can see a lot of similarities. And we might be getting a little bit into semantics here, right? Because I would be willing, we know Brad, and I would be willing to bet that if I asked Brad, hey, Brad, I want you to tell me some of the teaching points that you give your athletes when you teach them to row. So tell me some of the things that you're having your athletes do correctly on the jump rope. Those are the points of performance. They're not
what you're teaching to. Well, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, like, to your point, am I going to spend as much time teaching the burpee as I do the squat? Absolutely not. And is there an opportunity to start talking through like technique and maybe layering in when it's appropriate to step down and step up, or when do you breathe in your burpees, or how do you want to hold your rope, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, we know that there's time and a place for all of this kind of stuff, but that's some of the value of those 9 foundational movements. that we teach at the level 1 and why they are the 9 foundational movements is because we can then take the common themes and the points of performance in there and overlay them to all the other movements.
And figure out what we should be looking for those movements, because we know what the quote CrossFit points of performance are for, like Jessica said, deadlift, for the rowing or the sumo deadlift high pull. And then you just take that and look at the wall ball, the kettlebell swing, the handstand push-up. We can combine them and find that overlap there, which helps us figure out how to coach them. So yeah.
We got a question from Facebook, and it's, when you shorten your teaching, does that change how you coach the workout? So let's say you combine points of performance, or maybe you only focus on a couple points of performance. When it comes to the actual workout, are you only going to coach those points of performance that you touched on, or is everything fair game?
Ooh. I believe for me, everything is fair game if I'm coaching in the class.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree on that. It's like,
Yeah.
I might only have time to cover 1 or 2 things, or only a selective few, but everything's fair game. Now, that being said, I'm probably going to default to the points of performance. Like you said, if the goal for the day that I've already set out is keeping my arms long and not pulling early in the clean or the snatch, I'm probably going to default to fixing that and focusing on that. But if I see something else going wrong that is clearly as big or bigger an issue, I'm going to work on that.
Yeah, because typically it doesn't hurt, right? Like, what's the harm in being like, Todd, squeeze your butt when you jump a little harder? Even if I didn't, focus on that really explicitly in the teaching point, because we just simply didn't have enough time, and that's not the thing I chose to focus on. It's usually not going to hurt if you cue your athlete for better movement, even if it wasn't something that you really focused on in the general or the specific warm-up, excuse me.
Yep. And Brad asking, do you equate points of performance to standards for certain movements? And absolutely. Like, we've been talking about the air squat all day. When there's a workout, say we've got Cindy or we've got Murph, or we've got something that has a high volume of air squats, 1 point of performance is full depth. But the other thing is, I need somebody to stand all the way up, right? So your start and finish position should be with locked out hips and knees. And so I'm absolutely going to cover that. I'll probably cover, the 5 points of performance as I'm teaching it. And then we'll get to the point where I'm like, all right, guys, we're going to do 5 reps on our own. Here's what I want you focusing on. Every rep, I need your hip crease below your knee. At the top, I need you to squeeze your butt and straighten your legs. Looks like this. All right, here's what you're going to do. Do 5 on me or whatever. And so, yeah, I definitely think that's the case.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a, in order for the rep to count, these are the things that you need to do. And then that, the other ones are more performance based.
Yeah. So we've talked about a lot. I think it's time to see an example. And so, we're going to watch a video of our guy, Pete Shaw, teaching the air squat. We've talked about a lot. And so I want you guys to pay attention. I'm going to stop throughout this thing to kind of pull out and focus on how he's layering in the points of performance, the system that he's using. The other thing that we're going to highlight is the technique that he uses to teach. And I'll call that out when we get there. And this is an important piece too, that's going to allow us to more easily communicate this knowledge that we have and be more effective at layering in points of performance. So I'm going to pull this thing up. He's got a group of athletes. He's just told them that they're going to learn the air squat for the day. He's demoing the air squat. So we're going to cut this thing loose and we're going to kind of talk through it as he goes. Are you able to hear that? Let me just make sure that that's the case. Could you hear him?
I cannot hear it.
Anything? Let me make sure that this is the case. I'm not sure if I've ever shared sound here on this thing. Let me just play a little bit more here. Hopefully we can get this thing.
Okay, so first thing I want you guys to do is we're going to set the feet.
I can hear him.
Okay.
He's quiet, but I can hear him.
You take your heels, mark them right underneath your shoulders. So you can even take your thumbs like this, team. Thumbs on your shoulders. Stick your heels under your thumbs. And then duck your toes out just a little bit to each side. Just a little bit there. Good, Barry. Can you go a little wider for me? A little wider. Still good right there. It's good. Lorna, straighten your feet out just a bit. Kathy, you can go wider for me.
All right. So let's talk about, where is he starting? Where do we always start when we're teaching something?
Setup position, stance.
Cool. Yep.
Yep.
Stance, grip, and body position.
Stance, grip, and body position. In this case, obviously, he's focusing on the stance, having people go. He's showing them the squat, having them put their thumbs on their shoulders to help guide where their feet should be. And now, no surprise, because he's just taught them where their feet should be, he's looking around and making corrections to make sure people's feet are where he wants them.
And that is so big. It's like, so often we say something like, the stance and grip, for whatever reason, seems to be the thing that we say it and just assume that because we said it, they're going to do it right. Hey guys, feet shoulder width, go ahead and get there. And then rarely do I see coaches like really dive in and look for that, but it has such an impact on their movement. And so I love watching how detailed he is in looking at each person and making the adjustments to get them exactly where he wants them to be.
Yeah, even his first guy, he's like, move your feet out a little bit. And he kind of like wiggled his feet. He didn't really move his feet. And so Pete was right there watching, like, little bit more until he actually had him where he wanted, which is great. I see that all the time. It's like, hey, you shuffling your feet and keeping them in the same place does not trick me into thinking that you actually moved your feet. So watch and make sure they really put their feet where you want them.
Yep. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah. And you can go a little wider, John. Wider still, John. Alan, you're good to start right there. Excellent. Now, next thing I want you to take your hand, feel your belly, and I want you to turn it on about 50%. Like make it kind of hard. Good, and relax. Good. So that feeling in your stomach is going to be your bracing for your start position. When I say set up, you're just going to brace and get ready for your air squat. Okay. Now, when I say squat, the first thing I want you to do is send your hips back and down. So watch my hips, and I want you to do this. Okay, so the first thing I move is my hips. My knees are going to bend at the same time, but it's like I'm reaching for a low chair. When I say squat, you're going to do that. Hold the bottom position. Ready? And squat.
All right, let's talk about it. 1 point of performance at a time. What was it?
Hips back and down, line of action. First point of performance.
Awesome.
Well, although you could argue that he talked about, I would call the bracing more of like body position for his setup.
Same.
And then
Same.
the point of performance he's actually teaching first happens during the execution of the movement, which would be that he's asking them to focus on pulling their hips back and down.
Yeah. Yeah. So we set up, yeah, like you mentioned, we always start with the setup, which includes the stance, the grip, and the body position. Because there's no grip in the air squat, he went with stance, body position, which was a cool way to do that. And then the first thing was hips. And this is, I love this, Brad. You know, a coach is really looking for a point of performance when that head tilts like that.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now
we all do, Jess.
Yes. Do. Here's the next thing that I want to call out, and this is where I want to go, and we're going to continue to watch him layering these points of performance. That's like the system that he's using, but the teaching technique is one that we teach at the level 2, and this is not just for teaching CrossFit. This is a good teaching strategy for anything physical like this, is to start by telling your athletes what they're going to do, demonstrating it without talking, giving them context on how to do it, then having them do it. And then finally, we're going to check. So it's tell, show, do, check. And he, like, how well he did that, it's kind of hard to notice because it's so smooth and so succinct and so good. But I want you guys paying attention to that as he does this going forward. And I'll continue to address here. Yeah, this is huge. All right, let's take a look.
And stand. Alan does a really nice job here. Ready? Squat. Nice job, John. Stand. And squat. And stand.
And what's something that's kind of cool here is, one, he's looking for people and he's giving praise when they're doing something right. So when he's watching somebody's hips and they're doing it correctly, he gives praise. The other thing is this gentleman right front and center, if you guys notice, he's clearly not going deep enough. Now I'm catching him on the way up, so it's not quite this bad. But I can guarantee you that Pete saw him, but Pete's deciding to ignore that because he knows he's going to go over depth going forward.
And this helps to not overwhelm your athletes too. right? You know,
Right.
it's like, hey, you told me to focus on crunching
Hips
my
going.
belly at the beginning and then push my hips back, and now you're telling me to do something else. At the very beginning, when you're first starting this, uh, first few reps, great strategy to just selectively ignore and focus on that one thing.
Yep.
Time I want you to push your hips back a little more at the beginning. Ready? Squat. Next jump. Stand and squat. Next one. Stand and squat. Nice jump. Kathy, stand. Kathy, that was almost a little too much. Can you bend your knees a little more as you squat, like at the beginning? Ready? Squat and stand. That was a little too much the other direction. More of the hips. Ready? And squat. There we go. Nice. Stand. Relax. Okay. Now we'll work on depth.
All right. He just said it. Super simple. Now we'll work on depth. Let's watch this process go down.
So my hip crease, so my pocket, is going to try to get below the top of my knee. Watch me right here.
Sweet. He said that in the most simplest form fashion. We're going to get to depth. Depth is hip crease or pocket below my knee. We notice
So he's
that
telling them.
telling them. He's now demonstrating without talking, which is huge.
So your pocket's below the knee. We're going to hold that and stand. Okay, ready, guys? Hold.
Sweet. Gave the context once again. Pockets below the knee, and that's it. Super
And I love
simple.
how in the show portion, the demo portion, he's also specifically pointing to the body part that he wants them to look at. That's huge.
Yep.
And squat. A little lower arm. A little lower. And stand. Barry, that was a good job on the depth.
There's our athlete that he selectively ignored being high before, and now he's working with them because now that's what he taught.
Yeah, and so now he's having them do it, and he's checking for the very thing that he just told them to think about doing.
Go wider with your feet. I think that'll help you get lower. And squat. Nice, Alan. Stand. That was better with the depth this time, John. Push your hips back first. Okay, go slow at the beginning. Just slow. Ready? And squat.
So pause it for a second, Todd,
And jump.
because I love what just happened there, right? Where he's looking at the depth. He's really focused on that. He told his athlete, good job with his depth. Now on this next one, really think about pushing your hips back a little more. So he's reverting back to this is the layering, right? Like he's still thinking and looking for the hips back. He's already taught that. Even though he's mainly focusing on depth now, he saw that he's pushing his knees forward a little bit. So he reminded him, hey, good job on the depth. Now on this next one, try to push your hips back a little bit more. Just adding it on.
Heck yeah. All right, let's watch a little bit more here.
Barry, Lauren, good job. Nice, Kathy. Stand. I know that's hard. Good work. Okay. Shake the legs up for a second here, guys. Shake the legs up. Okay. But don't move around too much. Don't lose your place. Okay. Next, we're going to work on pushing the knees up.
You notice here that was significantly less reps working on depth than he did for hips back and down. Why do you think that's the case, Kristin?
Probably, without jumping into his brain, probably because he knows he has a few more points of performance that he is still going to teach, which are going to involve more squats. And as he's layering, he doesn't need to do as many as he continues to go because he's continuing to look for all the things that he's already taught. So first set's like laying the groundwork, and then you can just do less from there because we're adding on to it.
Yep, I think that's a big piece. And then the other part is like, well, if we think about depth and the way he's teaching this, depth is a static position. How many people can we look at in static positions?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He can look at all 5 of them, whereas line of action is a dynamic one. So he needed at least a rep for each athlete. And because he had to make corrections, he needed multiple reps for a few of those athletes, right?
Yeah.
So this is
really
that scenario where it's like, I don't need a rep for every athlete on every point of performance. But ideally, there are some points of performance where I'm going to need ideally a rep per athlete. So I think the combination of those two things is like, hey, we're going to see it as we continue to go. And I can look at more people and their depth holding positions there. Let's see.
So watch my knees. I'm pushing in the direction that my feet are pointing. Looks like this. Watch me.
Showing.
My knees get pushed up, so I'm thinking about spreading the floor with my feet. I'm going to drag my knees to the air.
Once again, he told him
How
what
to do it.
Yeah, I told him what I want you to push your knees out, showed it, and now here's how. Imagine you're spreading the floor and pushing those knees apart. Huge.
And squat. Good job pushing your hips back, John. Push your knees out, Lorna. Push your knees out, Kathy, and stand.
And now he's checking.
Knees are very good depth too. Okay. Barry, I want your eyes up over here. And squat.
And same thing with this. These reps statically, he's holding them there, checking to make sure that the knees are where he wants them. And he can also take a look at the depth while he's holding them there.
Yeah, I like, sometimes it feels slow and clunky when coaches are starting to use the system of layering in points of performance and then also using the process of tell, show, do, check. But if we're watching this, even without that, like if we weren't to pause this, it wouldn't feel super slow and clunky. It's like he's getting a lot done, adequate amount of like time and reps and all the rest of that stuff. I'd be curious to know, team, do you follow and consistently use that tell, show, do, check process? If not, which pieces do you think, like, if not, why not? And do you combine pieces? And if so, which pieces are they? I'm gonna pull this thing out. I think this is a pretty good example. I think we get the point of what he's doing. He's just going to continue working until he gets through all 5 of those.
Yep.
Let's see.
All right. So say your question again. Do you use the tell, show, do, check process?
Do, check process.
And if not, what is the process that you use?
Yeah.
In order to layer your points of performance in.
Yep.
Yeah.
You don't want to hit depth. We're all going to hang out at the bottom of the squat over here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go.
So everyone figures it out. We're just waiting for Todd to go a little lower. We'll hang out here until he gets a little. Yeah, right.
That's a great way to make Todd not want to come back. And then it's also a great way if you've got a brand new athlete that's, super nervous to be in there, that doesn't understand the context of the relationship you have with Todd, to feel like, oh, if I don't do it right, they're going to call me out and make everybody else suffer. I'm never coming back here. Be careful of that approach. I've done it before and it's not always worked out very well. Yeah,
blending, telling and showing at the same time. Yeah, that's pretty common.
That one, like, I fall in that trap. I think that's the most consistent one. Now, sometimes we'll get people that are actually like tell, showing, and having the athletes do. They all do it together. But here's, let's see. I used to show common faults, but received some feedback that not even plant the seed before they check.
Yeah, just tell them what they need to do it correctly. Don't tell them all the things that could go wrong.
I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, a teaching style in general is just we always want to teach what to do, not teach what not to do. And especially in the environment of a class setting, you guys know as well as I do that half of my athletes are barely paying attention, maybe 50% paying attention. And so if they watch and you demonstrate the wrong point of performance, even if you say, don't do this, if they're not really listening and they're kind of like in their own world and they watch you dip forward in the push press and they're like, oh, I guess that's how we're supposed to do it. And then all of a sudden they're doing it just like that. So
even if they are really listening, it can happen. There's some like brain body connection. And, I use this example all the time when we are teaching at the level 2 courses. When you talk to downhill ski racers, they are specifically told, keep your eye on the path, not to look at the trees, right? Like keep your eye on the path, because if you think focus on not hitting the trees, then you're only looking at the trees. If you just focus on the path, what you should be doing, you're so much more, you're just set up for success so much better. So tell people what they should do right. And then you as the coach should know what potentially can happen wrong. And that's what you're looking for. Yeah, I think that's huge.
What a good analogy there. Look at the depth of your stories. This one right here, I use this analogy when I talk about it of people that are blending the tell and the show. And I'm gonna use you as my example for this. I'm gonna ask you the question.
Okay.
When you're in your car and you're looking for an address on a house, so it's the first time you've ever been there, you're looking for those numbers.
I turn the radio down.
Why in the world
do you do that?
Yes. Yes. Wwhy in the world do you do that?
Because I'm an old lady. I don't know. Yeah.
Because everybody does that.
Yeah, everybody does that.
And here's the reason, here's my assumption of the reason why, and I'm very confident this is true, is because we as human beings can only use one of our senses primarily at a time. And so if I want to be able to see, I can't have the distraction of music, even though music should have nothing to do with my ability to see the address on the house, but it does. And so for those of us that are visual learners that need to be able to watch to learn without getting distracted by words, it's like trying to find that address with the music at full blast when we are talking through that demonstration. So separating and at least showing one rep without talking is like turning down the music in the car so I can actually see what's written on the sign. So hopefully
Boom.
that helps
Love
and
this.
gives some context right there. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, additional show, after giving the contextual items to put it all together. Yeah, so you show the movement in its entirety and then without talking, and then perhaps you break it down and kind of talk through a couple positionings, or you slow it and show it in slow motion and talk about what they should be thinking about. That's totally fine.
Yep.
But then show it again at speed. So when I say go, it's going to look like this. And then let your athletes end with that visual in mind so that they're super, super clear on what they should be doing.
Yeah, love it. Let's see. There's a couple other things. Brad demonstrating like air stuff. Like this is one of those like prep work, group management, like have your game plan. If I know I'm teaching something, what am I going to be teaching it with? For me, if it's a clean, I definitely need a barbell. If it's a snatch, it's a PVC pipe. If I'm doing dumbbell or kettlebell stuff, you need to have one over by wherever you're going to be demonstrating from. So
just
do the
a
prep
light
work
one,
beforehand.
nothing crazy.
Yeah, nothing crazy. You don't have to swing the 2 pood over there. Let's see, what else do we got? Tim, I love the fact that you took that away from your L2. Hopefully that is helping. What else? Usually show the movement first, but then just tell a bunch of the points of performance. No matter how articulate we are with our words, there are visual learners going to be in our class. And if we are just talking, we're going to miss the opportunity to teach them. I tend to make the mistake of tell while showing when I find myself trying to rush to complete. Yeah. Here's
super common.
When I'm at level 2s and I'm teaching them, I tell them what my favorite phrase of the weekend is going to be. And I try to use this for myself. It's always saying, and this is what it looks like. And that's the trigger in my mind to shut my mouth and show a rep without talking. So maybe you guys can use that and think about that. We'll get through these last 2 comments and then we'll go. I know we're keeping you guys a little over today. Yep.
Yeah.
Jess, miss the don't and just hear the do this. Yep. It's the exact same thing. We don't want to teach what not to do. Now, if somebody's doing it wrong, you can use that as a corrective strategy, but don't teach what not to do. And you already covered that one. Yeah. Well, cool. As always, that was fun. Yeah. Appreciate you guys jumping in and participating. Next week, we are going to move on to the teaching strategy of using progressions and talk about the difference between the two and when it's appropriate to do so. Now, the other thing to know, guys, is if you like this content, like we mentioned, and if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, go back to YouTube. We've got a handful more videos on YouTube of this stuff. Also, make sure you guys are checking out the Knowledge and the Knowledge Pro. There's a ton of great coaching content. If you're a coach, if you're an affiliate owner, check out Affiliate University. Not only will you get great business development and coaching, but all of your coaches will get access to the coach development program where you'll get feedback directly from Kristin, myself, and the other great L4s and seminar staff members from the team. Also know what we've got coming up. We got some cool things, right, Kristin? We're teaming up with HSN
really cool
for
in-person events.
Yeah, with 2-day workshops in 5 cities throughout 2025. You're getting all kinds of hands-on learning, coaching development, all kinds of stuff there. We've got Affiliate Con coming up. That's a massive event for affiliates. It's happening in October in Dallas. We're going to have links to all this stuff in the show notes and in the comments here. So make sure you guys are checking that stuff out. It's going to be open to affiliate owners, coaches, athletes, keynote speakers, education, networking, you name it. It's all there. So make sure you guys are checking that stuff out, and we will see you guys next Thursday. Appreciate you.
Same time,
Thanks,
same
team.
place.
Yep. Let's do it. Thank you for checking out this episode of the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. Now, if you're a coach who wants to coach more effectively, impact your members, and advance your career, then the Knowledge Pro is the next step. Inside, you'll get hundreds of coaching videos, weekly calls with level 4 coaches, and direct feedback on your coaching. From homework reviews to full class breakdowns, we do it all. This is the best way to grow as a coach and take your skills to the next level. Now you can join the Knowledge Pro at besthouroftheirday.com/the-knowledge. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Now keep coaching, keep improving, and we'll see you next time.